Um, Jerome, how can I put more light on that screen? That screen is very dark. Sorry?
Hiya. Hi,
Yeah.
Mark.
Good morning. How are you?
Something wrong with the sound. Good to see you. Good to see you. Can you speak?
It's good to be seen. Am I on mute? Can you hear me?
Yeah, now I can. I just disconnected the handphone.
Very good.
Lovely to meet you.
We'll meet in person sometime soon, I understand.
I believe so.
Terrific.
That will be wonderful. Thank you very much, Mark. Thank you very much for talking today. I know it's, some people, they celebrate Easter today, but I still believe that most of our students would manage to join, as well as faculty members. I see Doug Gilbert joining us. Doug, hi, good to see you. Doug is our professor, Mark.
Hello.
Hi. Pleasure.
Hi, Doug. Thank you very much for joining. Doug, are you back in the United States or are you still in Tajikistan?
No, I'm back. I'm all going through all the jet lag stuff.
Oh, right. Okay. Thank you for joining then, despite
Sure.
all this, troubles after a long flight. So how was the trip?
Well, it's an interesting part of the world. So it's a long
Douglas,
way.
we would like to hope that maybe you deliver a session on that part of the world.
I can do a little bit. Yeah, I have some pictures and a few videos and stuff. Yeah.
That would be lovely. I think the whole idea behind Sunday colloquiums is to make the world flatter and smaller. So please do. That would be
Okay.
lovely. Lovely. Hi, Caesar. Good to see you. Caesar is joining us from Beirut, Lebanon.
Hello,
Wow.
doctor. How are you? Hello, all.
Fine. Hello.
It must be very late there. Thank you for staying up. I hope I don't put you to sleep.
No, actually, it's 6 p.m. in Beirut now. So
Yeah, no, it's not.
Yeah.
No, I hope that we get students from Vietnam joining us, and that would be late for them. But Lebanon is not that bad. Hi, Oscar. Oscar,
hello, Professor.
good to see
Hello,
you.
Doctor.
Oscar,
Yes.
so Oscar, what city are you joining from?
From DC. I'm from Brazil, Brasilia, the capital.
Brasilia. So you're joining from the capital.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, that's brilliant. I see Alexander. Alexander is joining from Moscow. That's great. Vincent, can you hear us? Can you see us? I just see.
Yes, I can hear you and I can see you. I've just upgraded to a brand new laptop. I'm trying to figure it out with my son. Thank you, but I'm hearing. Thank you.
Oh, Vincent, the best way, ask the help from Paris. I mean, your son is definitely, going to help you. I know that. So.
Is this sad? Is this sad, Dr. Santanova, that all of us old folks have to depend on our children to get us into the new world? God bless.
Exactly, Mark. Exactly. That's the best way for all of us, right? It's like they are already the citizens of the internet and all this, high-tech world, while we are still the visitors. At least I am.
And the interesting thing is the process. He tries to get me to learn it, and finally he says, "Enough of this. Let me do it."
Yeah, that's very true. That's very true.
So we'll never learn.
They're impatient. They are impatient. So we should teach them how to be patient.
Well, at least we get some of our invested money.
There you go.
That's right. Hi, Kathy. Good to see you, Kathy.
Good morning.
Thank you so much for joining. So we have leadership of UBIS. What can I say? How lucky we are. So all questions we have about, business and crisis, as well as the future of UBIS, we can ask today, I believe, right?
Well, one of my exercises may be the future of UBIS. So, I don't think colloquiums ought to be just talking heads. So hopefully we'll have an opportunity to talk to do a little planning as well.
Dr. DeFusco, we are not going to let you go without difficult questions today.
I shall defer to our CEO.
Oh, great.
I'm so glad that you're here, Kath. I thought you were not going to be here.
Well, I couldn't speak because I have company and we're busy playing. It has been a wonderful, and you can see my sunburn. I was at the beach all day yesterday. It was really delightful. But yeah, I wanted to hear you, Mark.
God
It's
bless.
certainly a really interesting topic.
Good.
Because
Yes.
I've been in a situation on a board that was going through crisis during the financial issues in 2008. And it's very interesting the way some boards handle them and other boards don't. And, I think what you're going to say today is relevant for any of us who want to be in the C-suite or, aspire to run a business or be a part of an executive team that runs a business.
And Kath, the strange thing is sometimes we can make it worse, right? I mean, accidents happen. This is just part of life. But sometimes if we're not prepared, we're not thinking clearly, we can make things even worse. It's kind of that iatrogenic problems that, the doctor causes their own problem. So the patient died, but the surgery was a success.
Exactly. And actually, not to get too political right now, so I will not say anything about which side I'm on, but I think this is a session that the board of Twitter should be listening to.
Oh, wait. Everybody has only got, Wait, give me headphones. Okay.
Mona, we can hear you. Hi. Yeah, okay, that's brilliant. Those who join us, I tried to switch off their mics. It wasn't automatically set.
I have to say before we get started, Kathy is always bragging about how UBIS is a truly international university, and this is wonderful to experience everyone from around the world. It truly is an international university. So I'm grateful for the invitation and honored to see in person. I've been watching quietly and then been enjoying your scholarly colloquium. Sunday evenings is, that's true dedication.
Oh, thank you, Mark. That's the pleasure to have you. Let's wait a couple more minutes, okay? I'm sure that more people are joining. We have Steve joining us. Hi, Steve. That's Cambridge.
Hello.
Okay. Hi, good to see you. So we have Bonnie.
I wonder if I can just intervene a little bit and ask Mark whether there is a difference in crisis management on the board level from a business to business. I mean, you're talking education here, maybe. Me being active and practicing on a board for industrial or commercial activities within our region, whereby we have a lot of contingencies and crisis to manage all the time, and being in emerging markets and troubled politically markets, and so you think there are any differences between these two sectors, right? Educations and commercial and business.
Well, I think each industry has kind of clusters of their own problems. For instance, Kathy was talking just briefly about Twitter and a merger. In her industry, the financial industry, mergers, like hostile mergers, were something that boards had to be concerned about. Education, not so much, right? We don't go and take over other colleges against their wills. So I think you're right. There's different kinds, different clusters of crises that you see, but hopefully we can think about practices that we can get us ready for.
Hello.
Right. Yeah, no, that's fascinating. So I'm just reading some apologies sent to me. And
I never heard a professor apologize for missing a colloquium. This is remarkable. I missed routinely. Thankfully missed routinely. God bless.
Oh, Mark, we have the best students ever. I tell you, that's very true. Right. Mark, do you plan to share slides, PowerPoint presentation?
Just three slides.
Okay, so you can try meanwhile.
Should I try it now?
Yes, please.
All right, I guess I should find it first. I'm glad that you did this. All right, let me do it this way. That one I don't want to share. Let me actually take that off my computer just in case it actually comes up. That's very confidential.
Okay.
Kathy, you would not be happy. God bless. All right. All right. Now, how do I share this? I'm glad that you prepared me. I tried to get here early.
That's brilliant.
All right. I don't see it on my board. Oh, here it is. Very good. Let me make it full screen. All right. How's that?
Yes, we
Yeah.
can see it.
Kathy, are you proud? I'm now into the I'm into the 20th century. I haven't quite made it into the 21st century.
First, right?
Yeah, but I've made it to the 20th century. I know how to do
We're
PowerPoint.
dragging him, kicking and screaming.
Excellent. Well, Mark, now you can stop sharing if you don't mind, that we have more faces, the images open. And I believe that we can start.
Well, Dr. Santalova, I'm truly honored to be a part of your series. I've been enjoying the conversations previously, and I was really delighted to be invited by Kathy, who I'm surprised to be here. I'm glad that you're here, Kath. And she asked me to talk about kind of my go-to presentation, and I said, you know, I want to try something different. I'm going to go back to my roots. A brief story, and then into
Dr. Defusco, I'm very sorry for interruption. I mean, if you stop sharing the screen, then we have everybody else's faces seen.
So stop sharing.
Yes, please. And
right.
then I will, if you don't mind, I will just start officially, because our videos are usually posted
Oh,
at our
very good.
YouTube channel. So sorry, I'm sorry for interruption, but your enthusiasm is absolutely inspiring, Dr. Defusco. Right. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for joining us today at our Sunday colloquium. I understand that some of them celebrate Easter today, so happy Easter to those of you who do. Those who decided to still, to join us in the absolutely exciting, I'm sure, discussion of business sustainability and preparation for potential business crisis with Dr. Mark Defusco. Thank you very much. Thanks for joining. And Dr. Defusco, thank you very much for stepping in, for accepting our invitation and sharing your absolutely incredible, I'm sure, experience and insights about business sustainability. Just a couple of words about our remarkable speakers today. So Dr. Defusco was a president and the CEO of Bay State College, right? Mark, preparing for this session today, I listened to several interviews of yours. So that seems to me that was an absolutely exciting period of time in your professional life, because as far as I understand, Bay College was owned by a big multinational educational corporation traded on the New York Stock Exchange. So well done you leading it for a period of time. And I think the most exciting thing now is actually Dr. Defusco is the chairperson of the board of directors of UBIS. So that's absolutely, great to meet leadership. And that's already the second session when we have the leaders of UBIS presenting and answering our questions and, getting engaged with the discussion with the community of UBIS. What else? So higher education consultancy, Prometheus Education, right, Mark? So maybe tell us more about this. That's quite exciting as well. So the format is the following, as usual, right? Mark, you have about half an hour to deliver whatever you have prepared for us. And then the floor will be open for discussion, for questions and comments. So we promised you that, I'm sure that UBIS is an absolutely global university. So somebody is speaking. I suggest that when we ask questions, let's name our city and country. just to prove to Dr. DeFusco how global UBIS is and this meeting, this call is. So that would be lovely. Just housekeeping rules, as you know, that joining us, you provide us with your consent to recording of this session. Thank you very much for that. Again, you can choose whether you have your camera on or off, but it's always much more pleasant to see the faces. So if you can, please try to have your cameras on. And I believe that's it. So Mark, the floor is yours.
Thank you. I'm really grateful to be here and honored to have a seat at your colloquium. But you know, Kathy asked me when we get started, go to your go-to presentation, and I said, well, my go-to presentation is mostly for educators, and you guys get enough education. So I kind of went back to my roots, and my roots are really are very strange. I trained as a psychoanalyst many years ago as a young man, and found quite interestingly that it was a terrible profession. It was a lonely profession. You spend an hour with a person and you write a note, then you spend another hour with a person, but you don't say very much. And quite by accident, a friend of mine who was the founder of the Center for Crisis Management at USC asked me to join him. And I didn't understand why he wanted a psychoanalyst. I didn't know very much about business at the time. And he said, well, listen, we go into many of these very, very prominent organizational crises, and we find that very often the problem has nothing to do with technology, has nothing to do with how the design of the organization is structured. It has to do with crazy people, and we don't know anything about crazy people. So they asked me to join, so I learned a lot about business, and they learned a lot about crazy people. So I'm kind of going back to my roots and talking about crisis management, because in many ways, it's really the ultimate notion of sustainability, at least in terms of business and industry. What happens when inevitably something unplanned occurs? When despite all your best efforts, something happens, and ultimately crises always find our blind spots. They find the spots that we never pay attention to, that we think we have well taken, and the hubris of confidence sometimes gets in the way of noticing that the world always finds balance, right? And if our systems are out of balance, crises are a wonderful way to get that balance back in order. So, you know, before I get started, perhaps we can spend a few minutes discussing among all our scholars what do they believe? What's the definition of a crisis? What do we mean when we're talking about this topic as an idea? What's a crisis? Anybody pop in?
Well, ladies and gentlemen, the session is really interactive. Actually,
is this different? You don't want to interact? You just want me to talk?
That's the first time. Yes, exactly. Well done. You're definitely a pioneer. But we have a hand up. So Steve, please.
I would say it's something that poses an existential threat to the organization in some way.
Brilliant. Thank you, Steve. Marita? If you say your city and country as well. So that was Steve from Cambridge. Yes, Marita?
Oh,
I'm from Lebanon. And of crisis, well, we have so many, I don't know where to start. I don't know if it's at the governmental level, at the corporate level, educational level, when the healthcare system is collapsing, when the economy is in a meltdown, when you have political standstill, when organizations can't buy raw material. I can go on for an hour if you need more.
Thank you.
Exactly.
Yeah, thank you, Marita. Vincent?
Well, I'd say a crisis is an unmanaged series of issues. So issues that accumulate and escalate that are unmanaged lead to crises, just generally.
Right. Okay, Vincent, and your place, where you're joining from?
Sorry, I'm in the Caribbean, in the US Virgin Islands, St. Croix.
Thank you so much. Caesar?
Well, Caesar from Beirut, Lebanon. I think crisis is where is this event where things are going into the wrong directions versus your plan, whether it's for the reasons of outside issues and controls or internal issues.
Right, right. Thank you, Cesar. Maybe let us take one more. Shane?
Good morning, good afternoon, everybody. This is Shane Capozorio from the US, originally South Africa. I think the definition of a crisis is really an intensely difficult time, but it really comes from the root word of a key decision needing to be made in general. An important decision is generally what is required to get you back in balance.
Right. Okay, Shane. Thank you very much. Professor Gilbert, would you like to say as well? I can't see. I need to mute somebody, but
yes. Good morning. Thank you. I've heard that a crisis is an opportunity.
Well, that's a very good laconic answer. Thank you very much. So, Dr. DeFusco. Are you satisfied with the?
I am satisfied because because rather than me talking about what the definition is, I want to make sure that we all have a general understanding worldwide what crises are. That there's a sense of surprise. Right. There's a sense that the key decision makers don't have a ready answer, and they're required to make a decision about something that they weren't quite prepared for. I like the notion of an existential threat, that the notion of what this institution is different than what it was just a moment before this happened. And the fact that it was unmanaged and it escalated, it gets us into an opportunity that we haven't seen before. And then the last one I thought was very interesting because my previous company was owned by Chinese, where a crisis was the combination of two symbols, opportunity and danger. And so I think we see in each of these the notion of what we're going to try to talk about today. And so let me try to provide just a quick framework of what the crisis is, how we look at crisis. And being a scholar, I'm going back to my scholarship, you have to have 2 by 2. So let me share my screen and try to, obviously it's more complicated than a 2 by 2, but it gives us a framework to take a look at. And now how do I turn this? Here we go. So scholars like 2 by 2s because it essentially tries to define the world into one way or another. And so let's take a look at crises as, on the left-hand side, things that are caused by something inside the organization. And then on the right-hand side, the right side of the x-axis are those things that are external to the organization. And then as we look to the north, to the top of the chart, we'll see crises that are caused by either technical or economic issues that are from forces that we understand sometimes have no human control. And then on the south side, or the bottom side, are those crises that are caused by people or by social issues or just by the way that the organization works. And so we can divide a taxonomy of all of our crises into a number of different cells. So in the cell number 1, as you can see on the upper left side, we see crises that are technical in nature, but I own them. They belong to me. I'm the cause of it if I'm the organization. So product defects or service defects. I know that you've all been aware of what's going on with United Airlines and how they throw people off, and United is having some real trouble, largely self-inflicted. So that's a service defect. We were involved in both Tylenol, USC, we were involved with both Tylenol scares, which was a tampering issue. That was caused by someone outside the organization, but in essence, having some notion about product defect helped them to solve that problem very, very quickly. But we can have plant defects like Bhopal, India, where 3,000 people were injured and 300,000 people died and 300,000 people were injured in a plant accident. We all see what happens when computers shut down. Facebook goes down for 3 or 4 hours and people think that life is over. And then we can see that for public corporations, if they don't provide their owners the information the owners deserve, that's an issue and can cause all kinds of problems, both with regulatory issues as well as with unsatisfied shareholders. And then, of course, bankruptcy when the company can't take over. So again, I don't want to go over all of these things, but it gives us a framework to say, okay, what is owned by us? What comes from outside? So when Kathy was talking about Twitter, that's an external threat, but I ought to own it, right? If I have shares, I ought to know where my shares are going. And if Elon Musk gets a fancy, I ought to have a plan for what to do with it. The next cell talks about what's wrong with the organizations. What can we find that caused this? And so this is really more of a planning notion. How do I plan for crises, and where are some of the problems in my planning? So if I go about my business and I don't have a method to see if my product is strong or not strong, then shame on me. Similarly, when we're going to talk later on in this session in an activity I'm hoping that we can do, if we offer education to our students and we don't ask questions of how we're doing, then if somehow we find that we're not doing so well, we ought not to be surprised. And so UBIS is now becoming an organization that's really concerned with feedback, because that's how we can tell whether we're hitting our mission or not. And so the slide 2 talks about organizational practices that can help prevent crises, and in the event that there is a crisis, help mitigate the devastating effects that may happen as a consequence of that. You'll see in cell 4 the things that we are absolutely out of our control, like psychopaths and copycat killers and terrorists, and things that were mentioned by one of our colleagues earlier. Things that happen that seem completely out of place, but we ought to have some understanding about preparation for that too. Ultimately, there will be disgruntled ex-employees, and sometimes they act very badly. So perhaps as an organization, we need to figure out ways to at least mitigate things that might happen as a consequence. Hopefully, we don't have any disgruntled ex-employees, but in a perfect world, that's okay. Sadly, we're not in a perfect world. And then the third structure I want to talk about is actions that we can take as a consequence. So we can do preventative packaging. So we have tamper-proof packaging, so folks from the outside can't mess with us. We can tighten our internal security systems or have better detection of potential crises. In fact, one of the biggest problems is that in many crises, we see that there are plenty of alerts beforehand, and oftentimes we just miss really blatant alerts, things that are like sirens flashing in front of our eyes, and we just miss it. And so in this slide, the third slide, there's things that we can do as an organization to prevent and to prepare for potential crises. The one last thing I want to talk briefly about is the consequence of a crisis is always social, and we forget about that, right? And someone mentioned that when we're talking about definition, that it kind of shakes us to our core and it affects us psychologically. And in my work in crisis management, this was the one area that I'm afraid that we least prepared for. We tried to take care of technical fixes. We tried to take care of communication, which is important, letting people know what we're doing and how we're trying to solve things. But we didn't take care of people. And we didn't understand that when crises happen, people get shook up. And when they're shook up, they don't make very good decisions. So how do we care for the people involved in the organization? And so that's another area that I would like to chat about down the line. Unless there's any questions, I'm going to move on and come off this screen. Is that all right? Good. The next thing I want to chat about is the stages of the crisis, because it seems to me that you could enter into a crisis in any number of stages. And so the first stage I want to talk about is simply crisis detection. How do you know that you're actually in a crisis? Many times we find, in my current position, I speak with lots of boards who are completely unaware that their company is in complete danger of falling apart. And I always wonder, how can fiduciaries not understand that things are bad? Well, you know, many of us are blind to bad news, right? We don't like to think about bad news. That's why we don't like to get insurance for our children, right? We don't like to think about bad things happening to something that we love. And so detection is an enormously important part of crisis management. And to be able to have folks inside the organization that are keen to signals. That's why in many organizations we have potential whistleblowers. We have anonymous phone calls that you can pick up the phone and call somebody and say, "Hey, listen, I think this is a real problem. I don't want to lose my job over this, but you ought to be aware." So having detection and signals that tell us where the crises potentially are enormously important, because the faster we can get to things, the less damage that we can see. And then once the crisis happens, then we have to start to think about repair. And repair has to consider a whole bunch of things. The first is the communication, but many times organizations communicate before they actually think of a plan of what they're going to do, which again, I think oftentimes makes things more complicated and more difficult for the constituents. If you say, all right, we are aware of a crisis, but you don't have a plan of attack and you can't tell the constituents what you're going to do, the communication plan is simply an excuse. And so you can see that the time frame here is enormously compressed, because not only do you have to think about what we're going to do to make sure that we mitigate whatever the consequence of this is, but we also have to be able to communicate it in a clear way that doesn't startle people. And so oftentimes the startling effect, Kathy can tell you, for instance, in the banking industry, when a bank is about ready to go under, the communication is enormously important, because if people get scared, if the depositors get scared, it only makes the crisis more serious, right? And so the more complex systems that we have, the more complex our action has to be. And then once we start to have a repair, then it's time for a little learning. And again, many organizations don't get to this because you're so tired and you're so distraught after what happened that you don't really take the time to figure what happened. Why did this happen? How did we react? Where could we have reacted better? And how can we make certain that this doesn't happen again? One of my first crises I managed was the Johnson & Johnson attack. A gentleman in the Midwest United States decided that he wanted his wife dead. And so the way that he did it was he went into a pharmacy and he laced Tylenol capsules with cyanide, hoping that his wife would one day buy the capsules and take it. As a consequence, Tylenol had to take, the Johnson & Johnson took every single bottle of Tylenol worldwide off the shelf. And after several months, they figured out what happened. The gentleman was arrested. But again, Johnson & Johnson, their entire business, which is predicated on safe medication, was completely arrested for many months. We were very proud of the way that Johnson & Johnson acted. Obviously, it was a great cost to the company. The initial cost was about $300 million just in lost revenues from the product that was taken down. But what most people didn't realize was that there was a second Johnson & Johnson incident. And the second Johnson & Johnson incident happened no more than 14 months after the first. Now that one could have potentially been very, very serious, because once is an accident, twice is a pattern. And so Johnson & Johnson was extraordinarily open. They changed their entire manufacturing because they got out of capsules and they started to make hard medication, but they had to change the whole way that they considered themselves as an organization. And so as Professor Gilbert suggested earlier, that this was an opportunity for Johnson & Johnson to really remake itself and to start to get the security and the trademark that they were once very proud of. So the last chunk of this process is, how do I plan for the future? And which leads us to our exercise, because you gave me half an hour and I'm about my half an hour. I'd like to have just a brief exercise, because as a board member of UBIS, I think we as a community need to consider what are some of the potential clusters of crises that happen to us. I understand that we are moving more from an on-campus environment to an online environment, which provides its own problems, but there's all kinds of other issues. So perhaps as a group, I would like in the last chunk of this for us to consider what are some of the clusters of crises that we ought to consider as an organization. And then once we have a few of them, then to think about some ways that we can go about either detecting them, understanding that they're actually there, or limiting the deleterious effects that may happen as a consequence. Is that a fair exercise, Dr. Sanalova?
I believe it is. No, absolutely, Dr. DeFusco. I have a couple of questions. First of all, those first slides you showed, could you please provide us with the reference? I believe that some people, students of ours, they might use
Oh,
it.
very good. Well, you know what? My friend and mentor, Ian Mitroff, is probably the father of this work, and I will send you several of his papers.
That would be lovely.
They're now almost 30 years old, but I think they give a very good framework on how to understand things. And Ian, and God bless him, he's still writing and he's still getting called about things. But yeah, I'll be happy to provide the papers. I'll provide it directly to you and see.
Thank you very much, Mark. That would be absolutely great, because we, many students of ours are at this stage of looking for a conceptual framework for their dissertations. Right, and also from the top of your mind, okay? So Bay State College, what was the worst crisis that comes to your mind that you managed successfully, I believe, or hope to manage?
I'm sad to say I didn't manage this successfully, and I didn't plan on it. I mean, it's you know what? These personal questions, but you know what? Sometimes we learn from error. I was the banker on a transaction that bought Bay State College for Ambo Education, which is a Chinese multinational, trades on the New York Stock Exchange. And my premise was that this was an interesting opportunity because we had capital markets and we can do the kind of consolidation that frankly I thought was important in worldwide education. So Ambo was like UBIS in that it understood that that the nature of education as a worldwide marketplace is much more important and much more promising than just here in the United States with our 6,000 competitors and the effect on the world that we're making at UBIS, I'm so proud of, because folks who wouldn't otherwise have access to important education now have access to the world-class education, and we should be very proud of that. So that was the notion, and my job was going to be to go and have a consolidation of colleges who were frankly in trouble. There's lots of colleges here in the United States. We are overbuilt, considering one, people stopped having children in 2008 when the markets crashed. We know that college seniors are not going to be ready for college in 2025 because their parents stopped having them in 2008. So I mean, they're just not coming. So we understood that there were colleges that were going to be in trouble, and the notion was, let's consolidate colleges in trouble and be able to provide back office, the unimportant things, so that professors can do the important things. And so I had a shareholder with an enormous amount of capital. What I didn't anticipate was COVID. We could survive. The trade war we couldn't survive, and the trade war with China has proved to be just enormously difficult. The Chinese government took the U.S. trade war very seriously, and when our president kind of had fighting words, they fought. And so the Chinese government essentially said, no more capitals allowed to leave the country. And so, acquisitions that I had in the pipeline were not going to get transacted without capital. In addition to that, the Chinese government has had a notion about education. They thought that education ought not to be for profit. So between the no capital and the Chinese government deciding that education ought not to be a for-profit enterprise, there was very little to do. Could I have anticipated that? Well, I should have. I mean, ultimately, that's what our job is, to try to understand how the world works. But at the time, I didn't anticipate it. So I'm embarrassed to be talking about crisis management and a crisis I didn't manage very well. But I think that the notion, however, is good because A, I learned, and B, we're doing this again with UBIS now. I mean, I was fortunate enough to be asked by your board to help in your mission. And so I think that learning how the world works, and somehow the world works in ways that, you know, governments decide things without Kathy will tell us that governments decide things without asking us. So I think that's one of the crises that I think is something that will consider as an organization.
Thank you very much for sharing this, and I'm sure that Kathy has her hand up to support you. Kind of what doesn't break us makes us stronger, right? So thank you for coming even stronger to UBIS.
Well, you caught Kathy on a good week after she's been writing for 15 hours a day. God bless her. But
yeah, I'd like to chime in very quickly, because I think the minute you asked that question, Mark, I thought to myself, well, I think one of the biggest issues for education in general is political. And that is because, understandably, the higher ed institutions have been a means, all institutions, K through higher ed, are a means of educating citizenry. And so governments and the populace looks at the education institutions as a means of educating citizenry against their values, to their values. And when you get geopolitical strife, you have the issues of, one country not appreciating the differences in values that another educational institution from another country might bring into the conversation. And I will tell you all very intimately, we find ourselves right now in that position ourselves, because we are truly trying to be a global university. We are not trying to espouse the values of any one country, but we are trying to bring together dialogue that talks about values of all countries to create common understanding and common intellect. And it's been so fascinating writing these two reports, one for the US to try to get into the US candidacy, and one for the Swiss to try to get into Swiss, actually all the way through candidacy to accredited. And our consultants in both were it was comical, because the US consultants were saying, oh, you have to write this as if, you've got to make this very US centric, take out like all these Swiss terms. And then the Swiss council is saying, oh, you've got to eliminate the word American from this document. You've got to take out all these US terms. And you find yourself, as someone who really, truly, truly deeply believes in our mission, thinking this is exactly what's wrong. Why can't we appreciate the best of both values and both systems and bring to our document the fact that by bringing the best of both systems, we're actually maybe a little bit stronger in certain ways. That was not taken kindly to. But so it is, I just want to emphasize to everybody, the longer term existential threat to education really is politics, and the willingness of governments to intercede in free speech, free academe, the quest for more universal knowledge, et cetera, et cetera. And then in a microcosmic way, I immediately felt like one of the biggest issues, I think the biggest issue is data protection for students. Obviously, that would be a crisis that would be horrible to deal with if all your student data was stolen and released, and there are cyber criminals threatening that all the time. But the other problem that I really worry about is I am such a true, deep believer in free speech. I may hate what you say, but I would defend your right to say it, as long as it's not libelous. And in most countries, we have slander, we have libel laws. So I look to those laws to protect, from the extremes of free speech. But there is a growing movement globally that free speech intrudes on the rights and dignity of others. And there's good thoughts on both sides of that argument. But how does a university who's supposed to be embracing free speech and embracing people's rights to discourse maintain the balance of free speech in the university environment? So anyway, I've said enough, but those are my two, as a president, issues.
Right. No, absolutely. And I agree with you. I think the problem is not being able to share the values of other countries, is that most of people in power nowadays, and I believe in the accreditation agencies of the US and Swiss accreditation agency, right? We are cooperating nowadays, is that they were not educated by the global institutions. They were educated in pure American or pure Swiss or I don't know, pure British institutions. So that's what we have. But I'm sure that we have more comments and questions from the audience. So ladies and gentlemen, please use hands up notion. Kathy, if you switch it off, as Kathy has one on now. So please use this reactions at the bottom of your screen. You can see them. Or you can also put them in the chat box, and I will try to keep an eye on the chat box as well. And we have Caesar and then Dr. Shanti. Caesar.
Okay, Doctor, thank you for very much for the slides, Dr. Mark. My question to you is, don't you think that proper and adequate management practices and corporate compliances, meaning of having the right committees and the right structure, will help to minimize first the risk of crisis, and secondly will help you to reassure that your organization is agile versus external crisis by having the adequate whistleblower, as you call them?
Well, yes and no. Early on, I would have to say, Caesar, that sometimes when people try to help, they make things worse. And so I think it requires a more holistic view, because the most dangerous person in the world is someone who's absolutely sure of themselves, right? They think that they have the ideas completely in line, and then when something outside of their notion enters into the fray, they can't understand it, they can't perceive it. So I think, yes, are there things that we can do to prepare? Absolutely. Second, is there processes that we can do that gives us more self-reflection, that gives us a better chance to catch things early? Absolutely. But I'm often concerned about hubris. That we think that we understand too much and then when something happens, we get surprised because frankly we hadn't prepped for it. Well, that's usually what happens in crisis. Things that we didn't prepare for come and surprise us. So I can tell you one thing, however, that bad management will assure complete disaster as a crisis. So good management may be able to mitigate some of the crisis, but bad management absolutely assures you you're going to have the worst possible consequence. But that's a good question.
One thing I want to add to your statement is that when you said the holistic views, isn't that the core mission of the board? I mean, having independent board members and people coming from abroad and right committees, isn't that the core of the board?
It's a very good question, and I'm going to have to be self-reflective now. Dr. Santalova, you didn't warn me these things, right? The kind of embarrassing self-reflection in front of strangers. This is wonderful. With due respect, that is my fiduciary responsibility as a board member, and yet UBIS is not like my main gig. I have other things in my life, and while I have great love and admiration for UBIS, I have other things in my life, and so I'm quite dependent on the officers and the faculty, right? In fact, when we signed the diplomas, we signed the diplomas on behalf of the faculty. I'm dependent on folks that I'm just meeting today for the very first time. So should I be more prepared? Absolutely. Should we as a board have practices? I believe that we're beginning to do that, and I think we're getting much better at that. And I have to compliment your leadership, because out of most, I see lots and lots of boards. God bless. In my business as an investment banker, I see boards all the time. Your board is truly aware of things. You have a CEO who tells us more than we need to know, and never comes to us with a problem without possible solutions. So I think we're very lucky at UBIS. Can I be more active? I probably should be, but kind of given the practicalities of how life works, I depend on good faculty and great administration. And so, it's a very, very good question. And it's my second embarrassing question this morning.
Dr. Tifusco, your participation in today's colloquium proves that UBIS board is very involved as well. Next time you sign Caesar's diploma, you would know for sure, who you signed the diploma for. So not only relying on your faculty.
I understand.
Right, thank you both gentlemen. Dr. Shanti.
In defense of the board of UBIS, I would like to mention that the US accreditation system requires the board to be hands-off. They require board members to be appraised and provide policy level decisions, oversight, etc., but they do not require the boards. In fact, they very much frown on boards taking a very hands-on approach to day-to-day administration. They expect us as executives, the CEO and the executives, to do it. So what the board and Mark are doing right now is absolutely, totally 100% compliant with what the US accreditation agencies expect a board of an educational institution, higher education institution. So that's your defense, Mark. You can say
Thank
that.
you.
But in the meantime, in the meantime, I did have a question for Mark. Mark, you mentioned something very interesting about a dwindling population for college level, because of the lack of birth. How do we mitigate that? What don't you think as management we need to find other markets to approach, to break into, not just necessarily the college age population that traditionally goes to college? So isn't that something that we should look at? It's a
great question. It's a wonderful question, Shanti. And listen, just the whole notion of what makes a college and university has changed. And quite frankly, even here in the United States, we call non-traditional students those students who are 25 years old and older. But in the United States, those non-traditional students make up about 49% of our total student body. So if half your population is non-traditional, then we need a new definition of traditional. That said, I think the university is in a really precarious position, because part of what we do is we prepare young people to be like human beings, right? I mean, for centuries, we have taken like youth, people that are barely young adults, and over the course of a number of years, we make them livable. They can live with the rest of us. And I think we still need that. The second part of it, however, is we prepare people for work and for livelihood. But we don't think of ourselves as like, in the United States, we call it the farm team, right? Before you get to the major leagues, before you play for Liverpool, you play someplace else. Well, I don't know if colleges want to be that. I don't think that we ought to be in just the career preparing business. Hence why we're having discussions like this today, how we can talk about more important, serious notions, how to ask questions about serious things. And so that's why I'm so proud of this series that you're putting on. Every week you raise issues about things that are different, that people have a different taste for. How does one know what the rest of their life's going to look like if they haven't had a taste someplace else? So I think the very definition of what college is in a very precarious place. I know that we're starting to offer kind of shorter courses that are certificates. And while I understand the necessity of that, I'm hoping that that's not all we do. I'm hoping that we continue this kind of thoughtfulness, because I think that's what college is. That's what differentiates college from training. So I think it's a good question, Shanti, and hopefully your professors will give us a very good answer about what that is.
Thank you very much, both. Exactly that. Dr. Borlovan is one of the faculty members. So, Dr. Borlovan, please.
Hello. So Nice to meet you all. I'm in Bucharest, Romania.
Oh,
My
very
name
nice.
is Manuela. Very nice to meet you guys. So about your question, Mark, about the crisis and how us in UBIS can be prepared for it. And I think this is a very serious case in regard to what is happening nowadays all over the world. So I was thinking about reputation. What can hit us very hard is reputation crisis, and this is coming from something that Kathleen just mentioned, data protection. It's related to confidentiality as well. It's related to the way we are handling all our IT applications and the fact that we need to put a plan in place for being able to protect applications, to protect databases, and also to understand how can we would be hit by such a crisis and to have a business continuity plan. As much as we are delivering courses online a lot. What do you think, guys?
Thank you, Manuela. Dr. DeFusco, would you like to take this question, or actually
You know what? It's so thoughtful. It's so thoughtful, and I'm really grateful, Dr. Bolovan.
Don't worry, Manuela. It's nice, Manuela.
Thank you. We live in a world that in many cases we may not see our students until they graduate, and so I think it's easy to forget that we live in a cyber world when we've kind of been doing the similar kinds of things in the non-cyber world. So I think it's a beautiful idea, and Kathy, I hope that you let Manuela be in charge of this part of our planning. I mean, I think it hits all the key points. How can we be certain? God forbid if our server catches fire. What happens to classes tomorrow? It's a beautiful notion. So thank you for your thoughtfulness.
Mm-hmm.
I do want to say that we actually moved, and you may not know this as students. We should do a little bit better self-promotion at times. I'm very aware of that as a weakness. But in the fall, winter of 2020, we moved to Amazon Web Services for exactly the reason of data protection and global continuity. We, prior to that, were not on a cloud server by a major league company. And when I stepped in September, I was quite worried about our ability to get through business continuity issues. And we moved immediately. We were on the cloud on Amazon Web Services by December of 2020 for that exact reason. But you're right, there is so much more we can do, and it's in our technical plan.
That's absolutely so, right, Kathy? And if you remember, Manuela, we had a session on data privacy and security, and now on board of UBIS France, we have a lawyer and consultant in this area, Dr. Aurora. So we're doing good. I mean, we keep an eye on it. So thank you both. I have a question in the chat box from Matt, and Matt is joining us from Ho Chi Minh City, Vietnam. Matt, would you like me to read it, or you can speak? I don't know. Can you?
Hi guys, sorry.
Hi, Matt. That is
with my family.
Yeah, go ahead. So about crisis, and I believe that's more kind of theoretical approach to crisis as it is.
No, I mean, because I've seen, I think I've been with UBIS for about 10 years. So I've seen crises with UBIS from time to time. But of course, right, my question was, I would agree for uncontrollable factors that we've seen, in the education business, either politically or like the war in Ukraine, for example, that might disrupt a lot of partnerships, because I'm from B2B, right? So it can disrupt partnerships between, if you have a partner in Ukraine, that would be uncontrollable, yes. But I've seen a lot of crises that come internally, meaning that what we, the data protection is might be one of the things that that can cause crises because it's a system fault these days. But there are a lot of internal factors that can cause crisis as well. Do you think these sources of crisis should be handled or should be approached differently? And do you have any other experience that you can share with us, Mark? Thank you.
It's a good question, and Matt, thank you, and thank you for being up so early or late in Ho Chi Minh City. But here's I'll give an example, and I'm so proud of UBIS because we're systems thinker. We understand that the world is complex, and sometimes what we hope to happen doesn't actually happen. Sometimes it's antithetical to what we happen. Let me give you an example. One of the most alarming crises here in the United States was when our space shuttle blew up carrying a teacher, and millions of children watched a teacher going up into space get blown up. And after a thorough investigation, they found that the reason why the space shuttle blew up was a very, very simple reason. There was an O-ring. There was just a small part of the shuttle that was defective. But what they found was that for months, people would sound alarms that this O-ring is going to be a problem. It's going. One memo said, "Help! We're going to have disaster if we don't fix this." And so part of it is the detection, right? If we're on a time frame, and you know what, every organization is on a tight time frame and is getting tighter, and so oftentimes that tight time frame keeps us from the detection part. And so when people were trying to say, "Hey, listen, there's going to be a problem here," there's another force in the organization pushing back and saying, "Hey, listen, if we take care of that, we're not going to hit our time frame." The second part is even more startling and troubling, and that is the folks who were managing the project, and again, these are very complex projects, decided that they wanted to have a detection method for problems. And so they offered bonus awards for people who could define things that were going to be potential safety issues. And what they found, however, was that people were actually designing defects so they can get paid for the bonus. So sometimes when we have the right idea, the reward systems reward something that's very different. And so as an organization, Matt, I think what we're hoping to do is say, does our reward systems match what our stated goals are? Are there anything in them that kind of gets in the way of how we do things? Here in the United States, we reward professors with tenure. God bless. I thank God we can give professors tenure, but at the same time, are we rewarding what's most important? For many universities, the most important thing is not the research that you're doing, but are you progressing your students? Are you teaching them in a way that's important? So again, let's make sure that we can match what's important to us as an organization and make sure that the best laid plans don't go awry. But it's a great question. Thank you for raising it.
I think these are wonderful topics to be included into the syllabi of our courses on strategic management and leadership, to discuss that in better detail. Thank you both. Richard, you're in the United States. What city are you joining from? Is it New York City?
Good morning, folks. Hi, Tony. My name is Rich Stevens. I am from New York City, born and raised. Wonderful, wonderful to meet another patriot. So in terms of crisis, one thing I guess that is internally driven, I think, into people and into organizations is this need for perfectionism. Everything needs to be perfect. And this is probably the most dangerous thing that anybody has ever come across, because it results in people hiding information. I want to be perceived as perfect, so I'm not going to disclose something that could be potentially harmful to the organization. So we've seen this, I guess, in many of the business systems encourage perfectionism, Six Sigma, and I understand that in terms of mechanical in engineering, right? But humans are different than robots, right? Emotions, a variety of different things play in over here. Emotional intelligence sort of comes in. And I guess I haven't really heard those really terms being brought up over here, at least in this discussion. So my question is, how does UBIS deal with perfectionism? And do we reward people for being not perfect?
I think that's a wonderful question. And but in my defense, I recommended the person I recommended for today's presentation is it speaks about emotional intelligence, and I will make sure that he comes on one of your future events. I think emotional intelligence in terms of sensitivity is really important, Rick. And most organizations are really impervious to bad news, as we are individually, right? I mean, we don't want to hear bad news, and most organizations, especially, don't want to get bogged down by bad news, right? And so, oftentimes, I think you're correct that we just avoid things. But nearly every crisis has an early warning signal. Almost every crisis is kind of shouting at us, we better do something about this, and then we have the nerve to be surprised. So I think you're right. I hopefully down the line we'll be able to be more sensitive to both people cues and to technical cues of things that may be troublesome. And hopefully you'll enjoy Dr. Cherbuski down the line, and when he talks about emotional intelligence. But I think you're right. We as scholars, we value thinking much more than we value intuition, and I accept that. But we're fortunate enough to have a management team that has some of the best nose in all the world. So I'm very proud to work with a management team that has very, very strong intuition.
Dr. DeFusco, I absolutely agree with you. There are signals, right? And they are just not noticed in most of the cases. That's why we have a note from Apkar who says that let's have a discussion or a similar session on pre-crisis management. I think that's a good idea. Pre-crisis management does matter. Right. Do we have more questions or ideas or questions rather? If you don't mind, Professor Gilbert, I have a question to you about academic freedom in Berkeley. How is the situation with academic freedom and free speech there?
I'm afraid I can't answer you because we're not allowed to talk about it.
Touche. That was priceless. I'm
turn
glad we have that on camera.
Yeah, turn the recording off.
Okay, so no comments at all, Professor, or maybe just a couple?
Well, Kathy's comment about politics, I think was spot on, and I think that being aware of it and continually trying to monitor what's going on is very important, because it changes. I've lived through several cycles at Berkeley where things became very political. We used to have a loyalty oath, and then no one was interested in it any longer. It just went away for about 20 years, and now we have a new loyalty oath. Everybody who comes to Berkeley or comes up for promotion has to write a statement about how they have advanced diversity, equity, inclusion, social justice. I don't know if you're a biologist or a physicist and you're working with particle physics, what you're going to say about how you advance social justice. But this is part of the new loyalty oath. And I think it is potentially very detrimental, in part because in the past, it was students, it was a political arena, and today the universities have hired a tremendous number of people in the bureaucracy, not professors, whose job it is to monitor the social climate. And when your job is monitoring the social climate, if the social climate is fine, you don't have a job any longer. So it builds in a kind of institutionalized discontent in the major universities, which I think is going to be around for a longer time than the last wave. I don't know if I answered your question, I think it's something we have to be alert to all the time.
Professor Gilbert, you have answered in a very diplomatic way. Thank you very much. So,
Listen, if we don't have academic freedom at Berkeley, God bless. I mean, holy.
well, Dr. DeFusco, it hasn't been said like that, so we can't state that.
Yeah.
I can tell you when they held a midnight vigil and hung me in effigy in Berkeley 25 years ago, 30 years ago, the administration just shrugged. My colleagues walked by and said, that's fine, you could do your research. They don't like it, it's okay. And today, that's not the response.
Yeah.
Today, I'd be in a lot more trouble.
Right, right.
Antonina, I'd like to respond very quickly, if I don't mind, to Eben, who asked made a very interesting comment in the sidebar chat. I have served on boards for over 28 years, public and private. I actually am blessed to have had a wealth of board experience. And I will say, Eben, that there is there's a sensitive line between the fiduciary duties of board members and the fiduciary and stepping into the management's responsibility. Sometimes that line is actually regulated by regulators. In banking, they have one philosophy of what the separation of board and management should be. In education, it's quite different. What Shanti referred to, which is I think what made part of your remark, is that in many regulatory circles in education, they have actually had the opposite problem where the board has become too intrusive in management, so they think, and therefore management is not able to do their job. In other industries, you find people criticizing boards for being too hands-off and not supervising adequately. So there is, you are absolutely right. You are constantly, as a board member, trying to balance this. Someday in the future, I'm going to be talking about human capital management in the boardroom. Mark was kind enough to take over today because I had outside guests. But this is a big issue. It is a big topic for boards right now. What is their authority? What is their responsibility on issues like social justice, on issues like governance? It's pretty clear, environment, et cetera. And so I think as all of you progress in your careers as executives and board members, finding that balance between the role of the board and how intrusive you may need to be in a crisis versus how intrusive you may want to be when it's not a crisis. There are different lines.
Right, Kathy, thank you very much. We have, thank you, Professor. Caesar, we have your question.
Well, yeah, I feel like I'm having a lot of questions, but because the availability, no one is taking that. But let me state first by saying it's really an honor to be among the seniors, such as seniors with the huge expertise in boards and board governance and with management also. But I couldn't resist by saying again, and this is in line with the CEO's statement. I think when you are a board, whether a chair or a board member or a head of a committee or a chair of a committee, when you accept the mandate as a board, you'll know whether this is a consultative board or whether this is an operational board. And there are a lot of companies who calls for an operational board. They want to do a turnaround or something like that. But the whole discussions look to me like, there are really a severe, necessity for committees of that board to tackle the various subjects that discussed now, whether on the data privacy or protections or related to IT and IT structure, whether to the business developments and the future strategy, what to do going global, how to expand globally, or which regulatory to be, whether in Switzerland or American. I think and part of the major responsibility of a board is also lobbying on that level. So I couldn't resist, saying this statement. Hopefully that helps somehow.
Caesar, it's a really good distinction. But let me. I don't want this to become a conversation about boards only insofar as how boards manage through crises. But for instance, in my everyday job, not my job as chairman of UBIS, but my everyday job, I deal with boards all the time. And in many American universities, boards are mostly ceremonial. I mean, you have boards that are, 55 members large, and the reason why people join boards is because they want to meet the car dealer down the street, and they want to meet influential people who are also on the board, and they're not very fiduciary. I think one thing that is an advantage of UBIS, it's a very small board. It's an extraordinarily active board. Thank God we haven't had any crisis, but we have a leader who directs us, gives us information when we need to make decisions. And so I think that having a small board like we have at UBIS is enormously functional and gives us the flexibility that we need as a growing organization. So I think you're right. Boards make a difference in crises, but let's think about board composition and another topic, because I think without a good board, you're bound to have a failure. Good question.
Right. Thank you both. Richard, and then Professor Gilbert. Richard.
Yeah. Okay. Great conversation. And yeah, just to pivot this back into crisis management, what percentage of time is spent not dealing with crises versus, hey, we have a crisis and we need to get back to, because I feel I don't want to necessarily blow a crisis out of proportion, but a crisis is a terrible thing to waste.
It's a wonderful way of saying it, Rich. There's always the dilemma.
Mark, I'm sorry. I think I pressed the button. Please unmute yourself. Sorry. Mark, unmute.
I'm unmuting myself.
Sorry, thank you.
You know what? My girlfriend would love to have such a button. This is great. How wonderful is this? Anyhow, good. I think this is terrific. Anyhow, it's a great question. It's a great question, Rich. There's always a dilemma about whether you're Chicken Little and the sky is falling, right? You're worried about things that are not going to really happen. But I think when there's a real crisis, most of the folks in the organization realize it. Now, I think the question was what percentage is dealing with the crisis and what percentage is waiting. Sadly, I think that paralysis is one of the, when we were designed in a different age, right? And so when our adrenaline flows, we either run like crazy or the fight or flight. Sometimes we freeze. Sometimes we just don't do anything. And I think that all three of those chemical reactions are not really great in a crisis, right? And running away from it doesn't help. Fighting doesn't help. And those of us who've seen companies rack up attorney bills, the attorney bill sometimes put you in more serious difficulty than what the crisis was. So, the chemical reactions stop us, and freezing, God bless. I think it's a fair assessment. Oftentimes people don't deal with the crisis largely because they don't know what to do. And so hopefully if you have preparation oftentimes helps, right? One reason why we have fire drills is so that we don't have to think about it, right? The bell rings, we all leave. We don't have to think about what we're doing because we've prepped that before. Can we prepare for all crises? Clearly no, but at least we can have some defined action that we think gets us out of the way of trouble. So it's a good question, Rich, and keep on asking good questions. That's what gets us the good answers.
Thank you both. Professor Gilbert, I saw your hand up.
I just wanted to respond to Mark's comment about the size of the board. I've served on several boards, and I'm chair of a small board of a large social service agency. And you're absolutely correct. Small boards are nimble. They can move quickly. You can select people based upon their commitment to the mission of the organization. And whereas very large boards, you're bringing people on for all sorts of other reasons, status and wealth, and it's a lot harder to make decisions very quickly and to be nimble if you have a large board. The problem today, I think, is that with the demands for diversity, boards have to have a lot more different kinds of people from different places, and it's more difficult to sustain small boards. But I agree. I think that for an organization, you get a small group of the right people as board members who know what their job is and know the mission, and you're in a much stronger position.
Right, professors, thank you very much. Do you have more questions? I would ask my students in particular. Anybody else?
Caesar has more questions.
I know Caesar has a lot of
It's
questions.
it's dinner time. It's dinner time in your part of the world. I'm holding you from your
Believe
dinner.
me, I have many, but I should stop. I have a lot.
No,
but I should stop.
that's absolutely brilliant. But I would ask Mysore, do you have any questions? Mysore, if you could speak, that would be lovely. Or Fatima, ladies? In case you're both on mute yet, so if you could unmute yourself. No, not really. Okay, Caesar, then the floor
Well,
is yours.
I just have to say that agreed with both, gentlemen. In terms of the size of the board, it is recommendable that the board should be efficient and periodically reviewed and measured on efficiency and performances. And but what I want to say is, in order to be conclusive, I think such meetings should come up with priorities of initiatives with the manageable and deliverable in a short time, and then have specific committees to tackle these priorities and come back with independent and outsiders to come back with plans and then to be discussed and taking the right decisions. And I think this is the standard practices by boards, even on the commercial side. I'm not an expert on education, but this is how we used to be measured on commercial and business activities, and so it's just an opinion.
I agree, but I think there's a tradition, at least here in the Western world, that the agenda of the boards are really determined by the CEO because she understands the issues best. And so while it may be a conflict, right, because boards are responsible for hiring and firing CEOs, but we depend on folks who know best, right? Ultimately, the insiders are what's most important. So I think the most important part of what a board does is nominates leaders, and hopefully you get that one right. And so if again, I don't want this to become a topic of how boards are, but I think in terms of a crisis, you start to see real leaders. And so you thank God UBIS hasn't had a crisis, but I've seen your CEO operate in lots of other crises, and you're really blessed to have someone who's got incredible leadership and doesn't, she just doesn't give up in terms of very, very difficult times. And that's something I'm really proud of, because ultimately as a board, that's what you're dependent on, leadership. And so, if we make good decisions and hire good leaders, then we depend on them to control the agenda and get us the information that we need to move forward. But it's a good question.
That's very true. Thank you both. I was thinking, just listening to you, that actually, Warren Buffett, if you listen to his lectures online, he keeps saying that any successful business, any business that is capable to cope with whatever crisis, is the one that aims not only to satisfy its customers, but to delight them. And he would say, like, delight your customers. I've been thinking about that. Don't you think that quite often it's kind of over delightment that our boards and our leaders and our management are bothered with, and maybe a bit more emotional intelligence at the level of customers, in our case students, faculty members, could be actually helpful, because just I think that makes, okay, it does make sense, satisfaction, but kind of over satisfying and like just working just to delight people, I think that might be problematic. What do you think?
We are in an industry, Antonia, but that frankly, that other industries don't have. we don't have to tell, other industries don't have to tell their customers that they're wrong. They don't have to edit their papers. They don't have to tell them that months of work on their dissertation has to go for naught because they went down the wrong road. And so it's harder to delight someone when you have to give them criticism. So I think while there are things that we would like to do to delight our students, kind of stay out of their way, don't make the things that are not essential. So we understand scholarship's essential. So let's try to make the other stuff a little bit easier. But we're in an industry that's very difficult to delight when you have to give people tough feedback sometimes.
So you say we are not bothered. I mean,
well, I hope that listen. If we listen, even our friends over in Cambridge, which one of your professors is over at Cambridge, right across the river. You know, the great inflation over there is I don't think is very helpful. Not everybody is excellent, right? I mean, there are certain degrees and understanding what you're excellent at and what you're okay at is also an important differentiation, right? You can't be excellent at everything. And so hopefully part of what we do as an organization is to help give people good feedback that this is areas that you're really, really strong at. In this area, you're okay. I mean, it's
Mark, I absolutely agree with you. I think educators are more like doctors, and sometimes we have to cause the pain, you know, in order to make kind of make people benefit later on. So that's exactly the essence of our profession. But that was fascinating to learn that initially you were trained as a psychoanalyst. Yeah. That's very, very interesting. Actually, we have a DBA candidate, and that's Rick, who has got a similar training. Rick, do you have to share something with us?
I wasn't planning on it. I came from a leadership and engineering background and kind of went the other way into psychotherapy. And now I'm kind of broadening my horizon to potentially go back into leadership positions within the therapeutic community. I'm currently in the Cayman Islands, by the way.
Very good. So, easy to incorporate. Good. You know what, Rick? I think it's a great background, at least in terms of what Rick Stevens was saying earlier, is that having a sense of how people react to you will be enormously important asset, and so I think kind of getting both sides of the training will be very, very, very important.
I agree with you. And, you know, we know that already from the 90s that actually intellectual, emotional intelligence might mean more and better than cognitive. But I'm sure that we would be delighted to meet the speaker to tell us more about emotional intelligence and maybe, you know, to upgrade ourselves in this respect.
Well, he agreed, but he couldn't get here fast enough. So I was happy to fill in.
That's wonderful. Okay, we do not have any more questions. I think we give a big round of applause to Professor Dr. DeFusco.
Mark.
Dr. DeFusco, you start to teach, we give you professor title. So think about that. You know, a good professor for trans and strategic management or leadership you choose. So thank you very much. So I did not hear the good round of applause. If we switch on our cameras, please. Yes, everyone, that would be lovely. So,
Thank you, Dr. Santalova, and I'm really honored. I'm really honored, and I'm grateful, and I'll look forward to thanking you in person sometime soon.
Lovely. Thank you so much, Mark. Everyone, thank you. Please take the best care of yourselves and your loved ones. And we hope to see you soon next Sunday.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Have a nice rest of Sunday.
Thank you, Dr. Santalova. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.